No one remembered the day Eliza May Carter arrived on the plantation, because nothing about it demanded memory. There was no spectacle, no argument over price, no shouting overseer cracking a whip to announce her presence. She came the way fog comes, thin, quiet, already touching everything before anyone thought to name it. The wagon stopped at the edge of the Carter land just before dusk. The sky was low and gray, heavy with the promise of rain that never quite arrived. Eliza stepped down without being told. Her feet touched dirt that had been pressed flat by generations of labor, and she felt immediately that this land was tired. Not dead, just worn thin. She did not look around in wonder. She did not bow her head in fear. She stood upright, hands relaxed at her sides, wearing the same plain black dress she would wear for years to come. The dress was simple, high-collared, fitted tight at the bodice, falling straight to her ankles. No color, no ornament, no softness to catch the eye. It made her look older than she was, sterner, almost severe. But wait for a second before we continue towards the video. Let us know in the comments which country you're watching from and what time of day it is for you. And don't forget to subscribe. Her hair was parted cleanly down the center and pulled back into a tight low bun. Not a single strand escaped. Her face, pale beneath years of sun and hunger, was sharp at the cheekbones, calm to the point of coldness. Her eyes were dark and steady, reflecting nothing back to those who looked into them. That, more than anything, unsettled people later. But on that first evening no one noticed her long enough to be unsettled. The overseer glanced once, saw nothing special, and waved her forward. She followed without resistance, without hesitation, as though she had already decided that this place would not own her attention for long. The Carter plantation sat spread wide and low, a cluster of wooden houses arranged with careless confidence. They were not grand homes, just sturdy, well-kept structures built for permanence, as if the families inside believed the land itself had promised to keep them safe. Smoke drifted from chimneys, lanterns glowed behind curtained windows. Somewhere a door slammed, and laughter carried briefly through the air. Eliza absorbed it all in silence. She was given a small space to sleep in a shared cabin at the edge of the workers' quarters. The other enslaved women looked at her with curiosity at first, then with the same guarded indifference they gave everyone new. Eliza did not introduce herself. She did not ask questions. She lay down fully clothed, hands folded neatly over her stomach, eyes open long after the lantern was blown out. She listened. The plantation spoke constantly if one knew how to hear it. Floorboards creaked with age and habit. Horses shifted in their stalls. Somewhere nearby a man coughed, a deep rattling sound that repeated every night at the same hour. Eliza catalogued these noises carefully, not as threats but as patterns. Patterns were power. Days passed. Eliza worked where she was told, cleaning, carrying water, sewing, standing quietly in corners, while conversations unfolded around her as if she were furniture. She moved efficiently, deliberately, never too fast, never slow enough to draw attention. She did not steal, she did not gossip, she did not cry. People learned quickly that she was easy to manage, which was another way of saying she did not force them to see her. That invisibility became her greatest freedom. The white families on the Carter land were not cruel in the loud ways. They did not pride themselves on brutality. They believed themselves decent. That belief made them careless. Carelessness made them honest. Eliza heard things no one meant for her to hear. She heard a woman whispering prayers at night, begging God to forgive thoughts she never spoke aloud. She heard a man stumble drunk across a porch, cursing his wife under his breath. She heard arguments muffled by walls, words sharpened by years of resentment finally cutting through. She did not judge. Judgment required emotion. Eliza did not allow herself that luxury. What she felt instead was clarity. At night, when the work was done and the quarters grew quiet, Eliza walked. Not far, never enough to draw notice, but far enough to stand alone in the open fields beyond the houses. The land stretched flat and dark, broken only by the silhouettes of wooden homes and the occasional fence line dissolving into fog. She stood there, hands at her sides, posture straight, her black dress absorbing what little light remained. From a distance she might have been mistaken for a post, a shadow, something fixed and inanimate. She watched the lanterns flicker in windows. Fire fascinated her, not for its heat but for its honesty. Fire did not pretend. It consumed what it was fed and left behind only truth in the form of ash. Eliza had learned long ago that fire erased lies faster than words ever could. She remembered another place, another house, another night. She did not revisit the memory often. Memories, like emotions, could dull the edge she had sharpened so carefully. But sometimes, standing alone beneath a sky heavy with smoke and clouds, the past pressed forward uninvited. There had been a house once, white-painted, proud, full of voices that believed themselves righteous. There had been kindness there too, of a sort. Smiles, gentle words, promises made casually, then broken without thought. The fire had come quietly that night, not roaring, not screaming, just a soft crackle at first, like a secret being told too late. Eliza exhaled slowly, returning herself to the present. On the Carter plantation, weeks passed without incident. That was the most dangerous part. When nothing happens, people grow comfortable. Comfort breeds negligence. Negligence opens doors. The Whitmore house stood slightly apart from the others, closer to the tree line. It was modest but well kept, with a wide porch and windows that glowed warmly in the evenings. Mrs. Whitmore prided herself on order. Mr. Whitmore prided himself on generosity. They noticed Eliza because she did not fidget, did not chatter, did not flinch when spoken to sharply. Mrs. Whitmore requested her help inside the house, believing this was kindness. Eliza accepted without reaction. Inside, the Whitmore home smelled of polish and cooked meat. The floors creaked differently than the cabins. The walls held sound more closely, trapping words instead of letting them escape. Eliza cleaned quietly, efficiently, always present, never acknowledged. Mr. Whitmore spoke freely when he drank. He did not mean to. He simply forgot Eliza existed. He complained of his business failures, of debts, of the resentment he carried toward his wife for expecting more than he could give. He laughed too loudly at his own bitterness. Mrs. Whitmore wept when she believed herself alone. Eliza heard everything. She did nothing. Patience, she knew, was not waiting. It was preparation. One evening, as the sun sank low and the wind shifted, Eliza noticed something small, a loose latch on the back door. It was nothing, a thing easily overlooked. The kind of thing people trusted to stay as it always had. She touched it once, testing. The wood was dry, the metal worn smooth by years of use. She did not fix it. That night the air grew heavy. Smoke from distant fires hung low, though none burned nearby. Mr. Whitmore drank more than usual. Mrs. Whitmore retired early, exhausted by prayers that had long since stopped answering her. Eliza moved through the house as she always did, silent, composed. When she stepped outside at last, did not look back. The wind picked up after midnight. Fire does not announce itself. It whispers first. By the time the Whitmores woke, it was already too late. Flames climbed the walls with hungry purpose, fed by old wood and older lies. Smoke filled the rooms, thick and choking. Eliza stood in the yard, her black dress untouched, her face calm as the house burned behind her. The firelight carved her features into sharp relief, shadows deepening her eyes until they looked endless. She did not smile. She did not mourn. She watched. When the structure finally collapsed inward, sending sparks into the night like dying stars, Eliza turned away. By dawn, the Whitmore house was a blackened skeleton. The family was gone. No one spoke of them loudly. People whispered instead, uneasy, uncertain. Eliza returned to her work elsewhere, just as she always had. No one accused her. No one feared her, not yet. The morning after the Whitmore house burned, the plantation woke differently. There was no bell to announce the change, no order shouted, no proclamation made. Yet something in the air had shifted, like a breath held too long and finally released. Smoke still clung to the land, thin and gray, settling into the grooves of fences and the folds of clothing. It carried the smell of charred wood and something else, something older, heavier. Eliza May Carter stood among the others as the sun rose, her black dress unmarked, her hair pulled tight as always. She did not avert her eyes from the ruin in the distance. She did not stare, either. She looked at it the way one looked at weather, acknowledging its presence without assigning it meaning. People whispered. They always whispered after fires. Some said the Whitmores had been careless. Others blamed faulty lanterns, dry boards, God's will. No one mentioned Eliza's name. That was not kindness. It was habit. Enslaved women were spoken about, not spoken of. And so Eliza remained unnamed in the story of the fire, which pleased her more than recognition ever could. She was reassigned within days. The plantation owners decided it was best to spread the workers out to avoid too much familiarity. Eliza was sent to the Hollis family, whose house stood nearer the river. It was larger than the Whitmore place, with 2 stories and a porch that wrapped halfway around the structure like an arm meant to hold something in place. The Hollises were proud people. Mr. Hollis had inherited land and believed that inheritance equaled virtue. Mrs. Hollis believed silence was the same thing as peace. Together they maintained an image of order so rigid it bordered on brittle. Eliza arrived just after noon, guided by an overseer who barely glanced at her. The Hollis children watched from the porch, their faces curious but cautious. Mrs. Hollis studied Eliza with the polite distance reserved for objects one planned to use but did not wish to acknowledge as real. Eliza stood straight, hands folded lightly in front of her, expression unreadable. She was assigned to household duties again. Cleaning, mending, serving meals. The work came easily. Eliza had learned long ago how to make herself indispensable without becoming familiar. She spoke only when addressed. She moved efficiently. She never lingered where she was not needed. The Hollis house, like all houses, spoke to her. It spoke through footsteps pacing late at night, through doors closed too hard, through the way Mr. Hollis's voice changed when Mrs. Hollis left the room, through the way Mrs. Hollis watched her husband, not with love, but with calculation. Eliza listened. The river nearby kept its own rhythm, slow and constant, carrying things away without asking permission. Eliza found herself drawn to it in the evenings, standing at a distance, watching the water reflect the fading light. She did not step into it. Not yet. Rivers were patient. They would wait. Inside the Hollis house, tension grew like mold, quiet, persistent, thriving in darkness. Mr. Hollis drank more than he admitted. When the house settled into evening quiet, Mrs. Hollis retired upstairs. He lingered in the sitting room with his glass, talking to no one and everyone at once. Eliza would be there, cleaning or standing by, invisible as a shadow cast by the lamplight. He spoke of disappointments, of missed opportunities, of how a man could do everything right and still feel wronged. He spoke of his wife's coldness, her expectations, her sharp eyes that saw too much and forgave too little. Eliza did not respond. Her silence encouraged him. People often mistook silence for agreement. Mrs. Hollis, meanwhile, spoke to Eliza in clipped instructions, watching her closely, searching for signs of insolence that never appeared. She told herself she trusted Eliza. That was a lie she repeated often enough to almost believe. The truth was, Mrs. Hollis sensed something she could not name, a stillness that did not bend, a presence that did not shrink, that unease hardened into resentment. The children noticed Eliza differently. They watched her with a mixture of fascination and fear, as though sensing that she existed outside the rules they were being taught. Eliza ignored them. Children remembered things adults worked hard to forget. Weeks passed. The memory of the Whitmore fire faded into rumor, then into cautionary tale. People slept again. Doors remained unlocked. Lanterns burned late into the night. Comfort returned. Eliza waited. It was a small thing that began the unraveling. A glance held a moment too long. A word spoken softer than necessary. Mr. Hollis's attention shifted toward Eliza not because she invited it, but because she did not repel it. She did not perform fear or eagerness. She simply existed, calm and self-contained. Desire, Eliza had learned, was rarely about the other person. It was about escape. Mr. Hollis began finding reasons to be alone in rooms where Eliza worked. He spoke to her more directly, more casually, as though proximity had erased boundaries. He asked her questions she did not answer. He laughed when she did not smile. Eliza did nothing. Mrs. Hollis noticed. She noticed the tension in the air, the way conversations paused when she entered the room. She noticed how her husband's eyes followed movement he did not want to admit he saw. She noticed Eliza's unchanging expression, and mistook it for arrogance. Resentment sharpened her voice. Orders became harsher. Accusations were implied but never spoken aloud. Mrs. Hollis believed herself restrained, reasonable. Eliza absorbed it all without reaction. The house grew louder with silence. One evening, as rain threatened but never came, Mrs. Hollis accused her husband of impropriety in a whisper sharp enough to cut. Mr. Hollis denied it loudly, angrily, his guilt turning defensive. Words flew like sparks, landing everywhere, igniting old grievances. Eliza stood in the hallway, listening. She understood then that the fire was already lit. It only needed oxygen. She provided it quietly. The back stairwell in the Hollis house creaked when stepped on just so. Eliza learned which board to avoid, which door hinge sang when opened too quickly. She learned the habits of the servants, the hours when no one watched closely. Late one night, when the house had exhausted itself with argument and silence, Eliza moved. She did not rush. Rushing made mistakes. She carried a small lantern, its flame steady, controlled. She passed through rooms heavy with the residue of anger, stopping briefly where curtains brushed too close to old wood, where papers lay stacked carelessly near heat. She left no sign of herself behind. Outside, the wind had returned, gentle but insistent. It pressed against the house like a question demanding an answer. Eliza stepped into the yard and turned back once, just long enough to see the first glow appear behind a window. Fire climbed faster in the Hollis house than it had in the Whitmore place. The structure was larger, fuller, stuffed with possessions and pride. Flames leapt eagerly, consuming drapery, crawling up staircases, licking at the second floor with greedy intent. Screams followed. Confusion. Chaos. Eliza stood at a distance, her black dress absorbing the firelight, her face carved into stark planes by shadow. She did not move when people ran past her. She did not flinch when heat washed over the yard. She watched the Hollis family scatter into the night, their carefully maintained order collapsing into terror. The house groaned as beams gave way. Sparks burst into the air, carried upward like prayers that had missed their mark. When the roof finally caved in, Eliza turned away. By morning, the Hollis house was gone, reduced to ash and skeletal beams, indistinguishable from the land beneath it. The family survived, but something essential had been stripped from them. Certainty, reputation, the illusion of control. They left within the week. People spoke more carefully now. 2 fires could not be dismissed as coincidence, but no one wanted to say that aloud. To name fear was to invite it closer. Men began checking lanterns twice. Women locked doors they had never locked before. Conversations grew shorter, laughter thinned. Eliza returned to the workers' quarters without comment, without consequence. She slept as she always did, fully clothed, eyes open for a time, listening. This time the land sounded different. Sharper, more alert. She stood again in the open fields at night, watching the empty spaces where houses once stood. Fire had erased more than structures. It exposed something fragile beneath the surface of the plantation, a realization that safety had always been assumed, never earned. Eliza felt no triumph. What she felt was alignment. The world, at last, was beginning to look the way it truly was. And somewhere beyond the fields another family slept, unaware that their turn was already written into the land. After the Hollis house burned, fear did not arrive all at once. It seeped in slowly, the way dampness crept into wood and softened it from the inside. At first, people denied it. They called the fires unfortunate. They blamed carelessness, weather, fate, anything but intention. But intention had a shape now, even if no one dared describe it. The plantation changed its habits. Lanterns were extinguished earlier. Doors were checked twice before bed. Men walked in pairs at night, rifles resting against their shoulders not for use, but for reassurance. The sound of footsteps carried farther than it used to, as though the land itself were listening more closely. Eliza May Carter noticed everything. She moved through this tightening world unchanged. The same black dress, the same smooth, controlled movements, the same emotionless gaze that gave nothing away. If anything, her stillness made her more visible now, not because people looked at her directly, but because their fear sharpened their awareness of absence. They noticed who did not panic, who did not whisper, who did not ask questions. Whispers followed her anyway. Not her name, never her name, but the space she occupied. The way fires seemed to happen around places she had worked. The way she was always somewhere nearby, yet never close enough to accuse. Suspicion hovered at the edges of thought, never daring to step fully into the light. People preferred mysteries that could not speak back. Eliza was reassigned again. This time, not out of practicality but unease. The plantation owners told themselves they were spreading labor evenly. In truth, they were moving a presence they could not define, hoping distance would dull whatever edge they sensed. She was sent to the Barrow family. The Barrow house sat farther out than the others, closer to open land than tree line. It was older, built with thick beams and wide windows that drank in sunlight during the day and reflected darkness at night. Unlike the Whitmores or the Hollises, the Barrows were not respected. They were endured. Mr. Barrow was a man known for his temper. Mrs. Barrow was known for her silence. Their marriage was not loud with arguments, it was quiet with contempt. That kind of hatred lingered longer. Eliza arrived under a clouded sky, the air heavy with coming rain. Mrs. Barrow assessed her without greeting, eyes sharp and measuring. Mr. Barrow barely looked at her at all. His attention was fixed inward, toward grievances that never found release. Eliza bowed her head briefly, not in submission but acknowledgement, and took her place within the house. The Barrow home felt different immediately. Where the others had been filled with tension disguised as order, this house made no effort to hide its rot. Anger sat openly in corners, resentment clung to the walls. The floors bore marks from objects thrown and picked up again as though nothing had happened. Eliza listened. She learned that Mr. Barrow drank not for pleasure but to quiet a mind that refused to rest. She learned that Mrs. Barrow slept lightly, waking at every sound. Her trust eroded years before Eliza ever set foot on the land. She learned that the servants here spoke less, moved carefully, and avoided eye contact. Fear already lived in this house. That made it dangerous. Eliza did not provoke. She did not tempt. She did not interfere. She simply existed, calm and precise, her presence a mirror reflecting everything the house tried to ignore. Mr. Barrow noticed her eventually. Not with desire but irritation. Her silence unsettled him. He questioned her more sharply than necessary, searching for defiance that never appeared. Her obedience only fueled his frustration. Mrs. Barrow noticed too. She noticed the way Eliza never seemed flustered, never startled, never caught off guard. She mistook composure for judgment. Suspicion grew like a bruise, slow, painful, impossible to hide. The fires were spoken of openly now, though always in half-phrases and lowered voices. Strange times, people said. Bad luck. Something's wrong with this land. No one named Eliza. Naming required certainty. Eliza sensed the shift. She felt it in the way eyes lingered longer before sliding away, in the way conversations paused when she entered a room, in the way footsteps sometimes followed hers at a distance, stopping when she stopped. The land itself seemed to hold its breath. She returned to the open fields more often now, standing alone beneath a sky thick with clouds. Smoke from distant chimneys drifted low, blurring the horizon. She watched the Barrow house from afar, noting how light spilled unevenly from its windows, how one room stayed lit longer than the others. Fire, she knew, would find it easily. But this time she waited longer. Patience was no longer just preparation, it was control. The breaking point came quietly. One night Mr. Barrow struck his wife. Not hard enough to leave marks that would be spoken of, but hard enough to satisfy something ugly inside him. Mrs. Barrow did not cry out. She simply turned away, her silence louder than any scream. Eliza heard it all from the hallway. She felt nothing new, no rage, no sorrow. Only confirmation. That night the rain finally came. It fell steadily, soaking the ground, dampening wood, convincing everyone that fire was impossible. That was the mistake. Eliza moved after midnight, her steps measured, her lantern shielded from the rain. Water slicked the ground, but it also masked sound. The house slept poorly. Anger did that to a place. But exhaustion eventually claimed it. She chose carefully. Fire liked dry spaces even in rain. Attics, storage rooms, corners where air lingered. She worked without haste. When she stepped outside again, rain streaked down her black dress, darkening it further, but never clinging. She stood in the open yard, rain washing her face, her expression unchanged. The fire bloomed slowly at first, then surged, fed by old timber and trapped heat. Steam hissed as rain met flame, but the fire persisted, stubborn and hungry. The Barrow house burned differently than the others. Not with panic, but with fury. Flames tore through rooms that had long held secrets, exposing everything. Mr. Barrow woke too late. His rage turned to terror as beams collapsed and smoke swallowed the house. Mrs. Barrow followed him into the night, her face empty, stripped of fear because fear had already lived with her too long. Eliza watched as they fled. She felt no satisfaction, only completion. By morning the third house stood in ruins. 3 fires, 3 families undone. No one could deny the pattern now. Men gathered in groups, speaking openly of curses and vengeance. Some spoke of demons, others spoke of retribution. They searched for explanations that did not require them to look inward. The enslaved quarters buzzed with unease. People avoided Eliza now, not out of dislike but instinct. She had become something undefined, and undefined things frightened people most. Eliza noticed the space that formed around her like a clearing in a forest. She accepted it. That night she stood again in the open field, the burned houses marking the land like scars. Smoke drifted across the ground, thin but persistent. For the first time, Eliza sensed pursuit forming. Not yet action, but intent. Men would come. Guns would follow. Fear would sharpen into violence. She did not fear it. Fear belonged to people who believed they had something left to lose. Eliza remained still, her black dress cutting a solitary figure against the dark, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The plantation had learned her presence without learning her name, and that, she knew, was when legends began. The third fire did what the first 2 could not. It forced men to speak plainly. No one pretended anymore that chance was responsible. No one blamed lanterns or careless hands. The land itself seemed accused, and people searched it desperately for an answer that would let them sleep again. 3 houses gone, 3 families scattered. Order, once assumed permanent, now felt thin as smoke. Fear stopped whispering. It began to organize. Meetings were held at dusk, men gathering in tight circles near the remaining houses, rifles leaning against porch rails, lanterns casting long, restless shadows. Voices were low but firm. Words like patrol, watch, and hunt surfaced again and again. Someone mentioned demons. Someone else laughed nervously and crossed himself anyway. They spoke of protection. They meant control. Eliza May Carter moved through this tightening world as she always had. The same black dress, the same unhurried steps, the same calm, unreadable face. If she sensed danger, she gave no sign of it. Fear rolled off her the way rain slid from oiled cloth. That was what unsettled them most. The men noticed it even if they did not name it. Everyone else flinched at raised voices, at the sound of boots on wood after dark. Eliza did not. She did not hurry. She did not hide. She did not ask permission to exist. Suspicion sharpened. They did not accuse her directly. That would have required evidence, and evidence demanded certainty. Instead, they watched her. Too closely, too obviously. They followed her movements from a distance, telling themselves it was coincidence when she stopped and they stopped, when she turned and they pretended to look elsewhere. Eliza noticed, she always noticed. The patrols began that same week. 2 men at a time, sometimes 3, walking the grounds after sundown. Their lanterns cut through fog and smoke, their boots heavy against the dirt. They believed the noise made them strong, it made them visible. Eliza adjusted nothing. She continued her work. She continued her nightly walks into the open fields, standing alone beneath the wide Alabama sky. From a distance, she looked defenseless, slender, still. Men watched her from porches and tree lines, their hands tightening around rifle stocks. They wondered why she did not run. What they did not understand was that Eliza had already chosen where she would stand. The plantation itself had changed its posture. Where it once sprawled openly, confident in its permanence, it now felt hunched, defensive. Windows were shuttered earlier. Fires were kept low. Children were pulled inside before dark. The land held tension like a held breath. Eliza felt it in the soil beneath her feet. The first attempt came clumsily. One night, as Eliza returned from the fields, 3 men emerged from behind a barn, lanterns raised, rifles visible but not aimed. They called out to her, not sharply, not kindly. Their voices carried authority they were still learning how to use. She stopped, not because they told her to, but because stopping suited her. They asked her where she had been. She answered simply, walking. They asked why. She said nothing more than necessary. The silence stretched, sweat beaded on foreheads despite the cool air. They expected fear, they did not receive it. One man stepped closer, his lantern light revealing Eliza's face in stark contrast. Her eyes met his steadily. No challenge, no submission, just presence. Something in him recoiled. They let her pass, muttering excuses about vigilance. Eliza walked on without looking back. The men stood there long after she disappeared, unsettled by the encounter, unable to say why. That failure hardened resolve. The patrols grew larger, more armed, less patient. The word "her" began appearing in conversations, still without a name but with intention. They spoke of setting traps, of watching quarters, of restricting movement. Eliza felt the tightening net and stepped deliberately into its center. She stopped walking only at night. She began moving during the day too, between buildings, along fence lines, across open ground where eyes could follow her freely. She made herself visible on purpose. It was not arrogance, it was strategy. Fear required a target. She offered herself carefully, knowing that the closer they looked, the less clearly they would see. The fourth fire, though it would later be called the third family's destruction by those who counted survivors rather than structures, began under their watch. That was the detail that haunted them. The family was named Keller, newcomers, confident enough to believe they were immune to the troubles of others. They had dismissed warnings, laughed at rumors, left lanterns burning late as a sign of defiance. Men were patrolling nearby. When the fire started, they saw the first glow bloom in an upstairs window and shouted alarms that arrived too late. Flames raced through the house as if guided. Panic erupted. Boots pounded. Orders were shouted, then lost to smoke and screaming. Eliza stood at the edge of the chaos, exactly where she had always stood, close enough to see, far enough to remain untouched. The patrols failed publicly. That failure humiliated them. Rage replaced fear. By morning there was no more pretending. The men gathered again, faces hard, voices loud enough to carry. They spoke openly now of catching whoever, or whatever, was responsible. Guns were cleaned. Ammunition counted. Someone said her name out loud for the first time. Not Eliza May Carter. Something else. A word meant to reduce, to control, to make sense of what frightened them. Eliza heard it and stored it away like kindling. The hunt began that night. They came in numbers this time. 5 men. 6, sometimes more. Lanterns bobbed through the dark like a swarm of angry fireflies. Dogs were brought in, their leashes taut, their noses pressed to the ground. Eliza smelled them before she saw them. She did not flee, she moved, not fast, not slow, just enough. She led them across ground she knew intimately, through low-lying fields where fog thickened, across dry patches that held scent poorly, along fence lines where metal and wood confused the dogs. They shouted when they lost the trail, cursed, pulled the dogs back, tried again. Eliza watched from a distance as they stumbled, their confidence dissolving into frustration. She let them see her once, just once. A silhouette in the fog. A woman in black standing motionless near a cluster of trees. Lantern light caught the edge of her dress. Her face remained shadowed. They raised rifles instinctively. She did not run. By the time they reached the spot, she was gone, not vanished, just moved, as quietly as she had always moved. The men argued then. Accusations flew. Fear fractured their unity. Eliza listened from the dark. She understood now that the hunt was no longer about safety. It was about pride, about restoring an order that had been exposed as fragile, that made them predictable. The fires burned again, not one house, several, different locations, different nights, sometimes only outbuildings, sometimes empty structures. Enough to stretch patrols thin, to exhaust men who believed vigilance alone could defeat intention. Smoke became a constant presence. The sky glowed faintly even on nights when nothing burned, as if memory itself had caught fire. Eliza walked openly through it all. People began locking their doors not to keep her out, but to feel less exposed to her passing. The men grew desperate. One night they cornered her. It happened near the old slaughterhouse, a place long unused, standing alone at the edge of the property. Lanterns surrounded her, rifles raised, dogs straining. Eliza stood still, hands at her sides, black dress streaked with ash. Her face was calm. They shouted at her to kneel. To speak, to explain, she did not. Silence pressed down on them like weight. Something in that moment shifted. The men realized they did not know what they were hunting anymore. A woman, a force, a reckoning. Fear surged. Eliza stepped back, not away but sideways, into shadow. Smoke rolled in thick and sudden, carried by a wind that no one had felt moments earlier. Shots rang out. They hit nothing. When the smoke cleared, Eliza was gone. The slaughterhouse burned that night. After that, men refused patrols near open ground. Dogs balked at following trails. Some quit entirely, claiming sickness or family obligation. The plantation did not feel safer. It felt haunted. Eliza stood once more in the open field, watching men retreat into their houses, watching lanterns extinguish one by one. They had tried to catch her. What they had caught instead was the truth, that fear had changed sides, and it would not go back quietly. After the slaughterhouse burned, a plantation entered a state that could not be called calm, and could not yet be called chaos. It hovered somewhere in between, suspended in a tension that made every sound sharper and every shadow suspect. People still rose with the sun, work was still done, orders were still given. But beneath the motions of routine, something essential had fractured, the belief that things could be controlled. Men no longer volunteered eagerly for patrols. When they did walk the grounds at night, their movements lacked confidence. Lanterns were held closer to the body. Rifles were gripped tighter. Conversations were shorter, clipped, filled with uneasy pauses where no one wanted to be the one to say what everyone was thinking. She was still out there. Eliza May Carter noticed the change immediately. She felt it in the way footsteps slowed when she passed, in the way eyes followed her without meeting her gaze. Fear no longer hid behind excuses. It had learned to sit openly, coiled and watchful, yet no one confronted her. Direct accusation required proof, and proof had dissolved into smoke too many times to be trusted. What remained was instinct, and instinct told them that whatever Eliza was, confronting her directly would end badly. So they waited. Eliza did not. She moved through the plantation in daylight now with deliberate visibility. The same black dress, the same tightly pulled hair, the same upright posture that refused to bend under scrutiny. She worked where she was told, said what was required, and nothing more. Her silence had changed meaning. Once it had made her invisible. Now it made her unavoidable. Women crossed themselves when she passed. Children were pulled closer to doorways. Men stopped speaking mid-sentence, waiting until she was gone to continue. Eliza accepted the space that formed around her like a widening circle. She did not fill it. At night, she returned to the fields one last time. The land greeted her differently now. Where once it had felt open and patient, it now seemed alert, as though aware that something was nearing its end. Smoke lingered even on clear nights, drifting low across the ground, softening the edges of fences and trees until distance itself became uncertain. Eliza stood in the open, the silhouette of her black dress cutting cleanly against the fog. Lantern light from distant houses flickered like dying stars. She had always known this moment would come. Fire was never meant to burn forever. It existed to change things, to reduce them to something simpler, more honest. Eliza had never believed she would remain after the work was done. She was not interested in survival. She was interested in completion. The plantation, however, was not ready to let her go. The final attempt to catch her came without planning. It began with a rumor whispered too loudly, passed too quickly. Someone claimed they had seen her near the old river bend late at night. Someone else said she had been walking alone again, unafraid. The words spread, distorted by fear, until they became a call to action. A group formed. Not the organized patrols of before, but something more dangerous. Men fueled by exhaustion, humiliation, and the need to end what they could not understand. They did not bring dogs this time. They did not bring lanterns openly. They brought silence. Eliza sensed them before she saw them. The land itself seemed to tighten, the air growing thick, heavy with anticipation. She stood near the river's edge, watching water slide past rocks with steady indifference. The men emerged slowly from the darkness, spreading out instinctively, trying to encircle her. Rifles were raised but not yet aimed. No one spoke at first. Fear made them cautious. "Eliza," one of them said finally. It was the first time her name had been spoken to her directly in this way. Not as an order, not as an accusation, as an invocation. She turned her head slightly, acknowledging the sound, but did not step toward them. They told her to come with them. They said they only wanted answers. They said things could be settled quietly. Eliza listened without reaction. Quiet, she knew, was a lie people told themselves before violence. She took one step backward toward the river. The men tensed. Another step, someone shouted. Someone else raised his rifle fully, finger tightening on the trigger. The river murmured behind her, steady and unafraid. Eliza stopped for a moment, just one. The world seemed suspended. Fog curled around ankles. Water reflected faint moonlight. Faces hovered in shadow, contorted by fear and expectation. Eliza met their eyes. There was no defiance in her gaze, no plea, no apology, only certainty. She stepped into the river. The men shouted then, chaos erupting all at once. Some rushed forward. Others fired blindly, shots cracking the night open, bullets striking water and rock. The river surged around Eliza's dress, dark fabric soaking instantly, dragging at her weight. She did not fight it. The current took her. From the bank, they saw her stumble once, then again, her form dipping beneath the surface before re-emerging briefly. Black fabric flashed in the moonlight. Then the water closed over her, gone. They rushed the riverbank, shouting her name now with desperation instead of command. Lanterns appeared, shaking, in unsteady hands. Light stabbed into the water, revealing only ripples and foam. No body surfaced. They searched until dawn. They dragged hooks through the water, scoured the banks, sent men downstream to look for signs of her. Nothing emerged. No dress, no hair, no pale face caught on debris. The river gave nothing back. By morning the men stood exhausted, soaked, hollow-eyed. The sun rose over a land that looked unchanged, mocking them with its calm. Eliza May Carter was gone, or so they told themselves. Days passed. Then weeks, no fires burned. At first this felt like victory. People exhaled cautiously, testing the silence. Patrols dwindled. Rifles were leaned back against walls. Conversations grew longer again, laughter returning in thin, uncertain threads. But relief did not settle. It hovered. Because absence, Eliza had taught them, could be louder than presence. People began to see her everywhere. A woman standing between trees at dusk. A black shape at the edge of a field. A reflection in a darkened window that vanished when looked at directly. Each sighting was dismissed, then whispered, then argued over. Fear did not fade. It transformed. Children refused to play near the river. Women locked doors even in daylight. Men avoided walking alone at night, claiming practical reasons they did not believe themselves. The plantation carried on, but something had been stripped away. Confidence, perhaps, or the illusion of safety that had once felt natural. The burned houses remained unrepaired. No one rushed to rebuild. The land where they had stood was left empty, as though marked. Some claimed Eliza had drowned, finally defeated by nature. Others swore the river could not have taken her, that it had merely hidden her. Stories grew. They said she could not be killed by fire because she belonged to it. They said the river did not claim her because it recognized her purpose. They said she walked the land still, unchanged, waiting for something no one dared define. Eliza's name became legend only after she vanished. Before, she had been feared. Now she was remembered, and memory, unlike fire, did not fade easily. On certain nights when smoke drifted low and the wind carried strange sounds across the fields, people swore they felt watched, not hunted. Judged, the plantation slept uneasily. Whether Eliza May Carter had died in the river or simply stepped into something deeper than water, no one ever proved. What they knew, what they felt in their bones, was that the land itself had learned something from her, and it would never forget. Years passed, but time did not heal the Carter plantation. It merely settled over it like dust, thin layers accumulating until the past was no longer visible at a glance, yet never truly gone. New families came, old ones moved away, names changed, deeds were rewritten. But the land itself resisted forgetting. The fires never returned in the same way. That perhaps frightened people more than if they had. At first there was cautious optimism. With Eliza May Carter gone, taken by the river, they said, the nights grew quieter. Smoke no longer crept across the fields uninvited. The sky stayed dark instead of glowing faintly with remembered flame. Men slept deeper. Women loosened their grip on door latches. Children wandered farther from the houses again, their laughter returning in uncertain bursts. Yet something essential never came back. Trust. The burned plots of land remained empty long after they could have been rebuilt. No one openly declared them cursed, but no one rushed to claim them either. Grass grew tall there, untended. Charred beams sank slowly into the soil. When fog rolled in at night, it pooled thickest around those spaces, as though drawn to them. People avoided walking there after dark. They told themselves it was habit. New houses were built farther inward, closer together, as though proximity could provide protection. Windows were smaller, doors heavier, fireplaces better tended. The architecture itself changed, reflecting a new understanding of vulnerability. Eliza had altered the shape of their fear. Stories about her began circulating almost immediately after her disappearance. At first they were practical, restrained. People said she had drowned. said the river had finally taken what fire could not, said there was nothing supernatural about it, just a woman caught in a current too strong to fight. But stories never stay small. Within a year, details shifted. Someone claimed they had seen her standing on the riverbank weeks after she vanished, dress dry, hair neat, watching the water as if considering it. Another swore she appeared in the reflection of a window one night, gone when the glass was touched. Children began repeating stories they could not have heard directly. They said there was a woman in black who walked between houses when the moon was low, that she never spoke, that she never hurried, that dogs refused to bark at her. That fire followed her footsteps like a memory that could not let go. Parents scolded them for repeating nonsense, then locked their doors anyway. Eliza's name became something people said carefully, as though it might answer if spoken too loudly. Those who had known her personally remembered the details that unsettled them most. Not the fires, but the stillness. The way she had never seemed afraid, the way she had never asked for mercy or explanation. That memory endured. Years later, when a minor fire broke out in a storage shed, quickly extinguished, easily explained, panic rippled through the plantation faster than flame. Men rushed out with rifles, women gathered children. Someone shouted her name before realizing what they were doing. The fear felt old, familiar, like something that had been waiting patiently. The river, meanwhile, continued its steady work. It carried silt, branches, broken things. It gave back nothing of Eliza. No bones surfaced, no fabric snagged on rocks downstream. For a long time, men searched after storms, convinced the river might finally return what it had taken. It never did. Eventually, they stopped looking. But the river never lost its reputation. People avoided it at night. They warned newcomers not to linger near it after dusk. Some claimed the water felt colder there than elsewhere, even in summer. Others said it moved differently, as though something beneath the surface disturbed its flow. No one swam there. Not anymore. As decades passed, Eliza's story slipped further from history and deeper into legend. The details blurred, her age changed, her origins shifted. Some said she had been born on the land. Others claimed she came from elsewhere, already carrying fire with her. But certain things never changed. She always wore black. She always stood upright, unbowed. She always watched. Former patrolmen, now old and half-forgotten, sometimes spoke of her late at night after drink loosened their tongues. They described moments they had never shared publicly, the way lantern lights seemed to dim around her, the way sound behaved strangely in her presence, the way the land itself seemed to align with her movements. They spoke of the moment by the river most often, not with pride, with shame. Because in that moment they realized too late that they had not been chasing a criminal or a threat. They had been trying to erase a reckoning. Eliza had not run from them. She had chosen when to leave. That understanding haunted them far more than the fires ever had. New generations grew up hearing the stories without fully believing them. Progress arrived in pieces. Roads improved. Tools changed. The world pressed forward. But certain habits remained strangely fixed. People still checked lanterns twice. People still avoided empty land where houses once stood. People still locked doors at night, even when there was no clear reason to. Fear had been inherited. On rare nights, nights when fog rolled in thick and low, when smoke from distant chimneys hung heavy in the air, some claimed they saw her again. A woman standing between houses, a figure in black, unchanged by time. She never approached, never spoke. She simply stood, watching, as she always had. Those who saw her never called out. They went inside quietly and waited for morning. No one ever found proof of her return. No footprints, no ash, no flame. Yet the sightings never fully stopped. They passed through generations like a secret no one could quite bury. Eliza May Carter became something the plantation could not rid itself of, not because she haunted it, but because she had exposed it. Fire, she had taught them, was not the enemy. Fire was the truth made visible. In time, the land itself seemed to accept her as part of its history. Grass grew where ashes once lay. Trees reclaimed space. The burned plots softened, but never fully blended back in. Even nature respected the scars, and somewhere beneath the soil, beneath memory and myth, something remained unresolved. Whether Eliza died in that river or stepped into something beyond it, no one could say with certainty. Perhaps even she no longer mattered as a person. What mattered was what she left behind. A plantation that could no longer pretend innocence. Families that understood how quickly power could turn brittle. A land that remembered being challenged, long after her name faded from records, long after fires became stories instead of threats. Fear still changed sides whenever her legend was spoken, and on certain nights when the wind shifted just right and the darkness felt heavier than it should, people swore they sensed her presence. Not angry, not vengeful, but complete, standing, watching, waiting for the world to forget again.